Hey everyone, it's Tiger with one more line of code. We're going to continue Riome today, episode 2. We are going to set up our first endpoint. Um, in order to do something in the endpoint, I'm also going to set up our first log, or logging, I guess. But I think that's about all we're going to get through in this episode. There's a lot of just setup involved and just kind of getting these kind of first starter pieces involved. So a lot of these first episodes, it'll seem like we're not really doing a lot, but it's because we're kind of prepping for a lot of things that are coming up later on. So with that, let's just go ahead and get started. If you remember last time, we had basically just set up our folder structure. So we're going to continue right from there. Let's grab Rider. Of course, we'll open Riome. And these were our projects we created. Just minimize, everything's pretty empty. So what I want to look at first, just to get started, is just what are we starting with, right? So in Web API, I just wanted to check out program to see what's already in here. This is the normal weather forecast, little dummy code thing that they give you. So we'll start this up and just see what it does. I mean, this should work, but let's find out anyways. In Rider, this is the build button up here. This is the run button, and this is the run in debug mode. I'll be running in debug 99.9% of the time. This is the project selector. I guess the profile selector. I'm never actually going to be running the HTTPS version. I'm going to go ahead and delete that right away. Don't ask again. So this way we're only ever running in HTTPS. You see I get the little SSL certificate at the bottom here. If I move my head. That I don't have the developer certificate on here right away. Let's go ahead and just set that up. We get this a little bit easier to see. This weird error here. I don't think this thumbprint's going to hurt anything if it gets exposed for me, but because we're going to be hooking up HTTPS locally, this is kind of generating our own local SSL certificate is really all that's happening. If I hit OK on that, you'll see I just get the cert is set up correctly down here. Super simple. It's a non-issue. Again, if you would have been doing this a lot, if this wasn't a clean install, that probably would have already been there. So HTTPS, let's go ahead and run in debug and just make sure that, nothing exploded from us doing basically nothing, right? Start it up. It looks like we get some logs, and we're starting to show at HTTPS 7288. Let's go ahead and just hit that in a little quick window here. If I go to this, I think nothing will happen. Yep. But if I do /weather forecast, I should get some data here, and I'll hit pretty print just so you can see that we're getting some stuff. Screen size, of course, screen shape. What is it? We're at a premium for screen size here, but basically the weather forecast just generates a random allotment of temperatures and I guess summaries for those temperatures. They're kind of funny. 46 degrees is scorching. It's all random data, random numbers, random summaries, random whatever put together 1 to 5. It's just for us to test, obviously. But as long as we got this response, of course, we're working perfectly fine. So everything is running fine. We can go ahead and stop. I expected it to, so there's nothing, nothing crazy going on there. We're gonna create our own endpoint, but in order to test a little bit different, I do want to get Postman. So I want to get that started here really quick. Let me switch here. So Postman. There's a bunch of these. I don't know the names of all of them. Postman is like an API test tool, like a REST test tool thing. There we go, download. Insomnia, I know, is one of them. I think Hopscotch is another one that I've seen lately as an open source coming up. I'm using Postman because that's just what I know the most. I've used a bunch of them. They all work fine. If you like some other one, go for it. They all almost do the same thing. I'm sure there's pluses, minuses to each. Postman does require a login, a sign up, so you will have to sign up, but it is free. I'm not a huge fan of that, but I already had this account, so we're gonna fire it up. I assume I'm gonna have to cut when I do my login, but let's go ahead and fire this up first. Anything? Yeah, there we go. Get rid of that back there. So I do have an account here. I will log in. So I'm gonna cut this quick so I can log in. Alrighty, login worked. We get set up here with this is, I guess, empty. Let me see if there's like a dark mode for this quick. Theme, sync with system. Let's go nighttime. Dark. There we go. And we can get our very first, we'll set up the weather forecast here quick. So I'm going to hit plus on new collection over here. In collections, there's a little plus button. Not the new for a workspace. We don't need a new workspace. I need a new collection. Blank one is fine. I'm going to call this Riome. And then we will add our very first request, which will be a get to that same 7288 and weather forecast, I think is what this was. Weather forecast. And I will go ahead and send this, which fails. But if I pull back a bit, it's failing because we aren't running. Let's go ahead and run. And as this starts up, now we should be able to hit send. And we get some data showing up down here, which is what we would expect. So we can use this from now on for doing our testing instead of having to go to the website. As I say that, what I will do here, I'm going to stop the background thing. I just want to clean up this background stuff and come back in. I am going to set up some environments, and I want to create this localhost as a variable. I want it as a variable so that we can quickly jump between staging, production, development environments. So what I want to do is turn this 7288 into a variable. I'm going to copy it quick. On the left here we have environments. There's also up here, I think you can hit create new environment. I'm going to do it from the left side. Environments, again, there's a little plus, and we will create a development environment right now. I'll go ahead and create the others as well, but I'm not actually going to be using them. Staging and production. I will be using them, just not right now. So the only one I care about right now is development environment. I'll set up something base URL, call it whatever you'd like, just remember. And I'm going to put the initial value in here as the 7288 localhost. Some people put a slash in here, some people won't. It doesn't really matter as long as you know what it is, that when you're creating the URLs later, you know what to put. And save. I can put the same things in staging and production. I'm not going to yet, since I'm not even going to be using them. I'm just going to jump back to my collection, jump here to this weather forecast, set my environment to development. It should always remember that now, so I should always come into here. And then I just need to swap out my variable with, what do you call it, 2 curly brackets. And it is not finding it right now. Red's a bad sign, and it's telling me it can't find this thing. Let me check my environment to make sure I spelled this right. I didn't. Can you see that at all? It's hard to see, but I hit base URLL here. So let me back that out and save. go back to our collection, and now you see this is turned blue instead of red. And let me just behind the scenes here, I'm hitting run on our project again. Send. There, you can see it's working. Now what I'll be able to do later on is I can just kind of hit staging, I can hit production, and I can switch this all around, and I'll be hitting whichever site that I want to. Cool. So now we have a way to test. I'm gonna go ahead and pin this to the taskbar too, because we use that one a lot. Let's go ahead and stop. All right. For my test, I'm mostly going to take this get. I want to just do we'll just call it like a health check right away. And this will expand. So I can remove any of the weather forecast stuff. Let me get rid of this for you. I'm undoing here so you can see. I deleted this weather forecast down here and the summaries up here. So we just get down to the weather forecast. Of course, that's giving me some broken stuff, but we don't really care. We're going to get rid of it all. I'm also going to get rid of this name. And this will be our health check. What we'll do is just something like this will return a 200 OK and just the text string success. Just for the sake of showing this to make sure it's working, I'm going to switch this weather forecast to our health check endpoint. So it's our base URL / health check. I believe I did a dash. And save and send. Now you see we do get a success string back and a 200, which is as expected. Cool. Pretty simple stuff. Now the not problem, but as you grow, as our API is going to grow, Riome's going to get pretty large as far as API goes. I don't want to be copying and pasting and making 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 of these endpoints all here in this program.cs. It's going to get out of control. So in Web API, I'm going to make a folder called endpoints. I'm going to make folders in here. I'm going to make a folder for each kind of section that I'm working on. So what we're going to start with today is the health checks section. There will be customer section, there will be probably travel section or navigation section, or I don't know what we're all going to have for sections, but just, there will be a folder for each section. Health checks will be our first one, and I'm just going to make a file in it called endpoints. It's asking if I want to add this to my Git repository. Of course I do, so I'm going to say don't ask and just always add. I'm going to make this class internal, just because it should never be touched or fiddled with by anybody else outside of this project. And in here what I'm going to do is I want to map that endpoint. I basically want to do that same map.get, but I want to do it in endpoints. So if I take a look at this app, I think you can see, yeah, so app is local variable, which is a web application, okay? If I look at web application, if I just F12 on this or dig or whatever your go-to definition button is, see that this is a Microsoft.ASP.NET Core Builder thing. There's web application, which inherits from iHost, iApplication Builder, and iEndpoint Route Builder. I can use web application, but I'm going to use iEndpoint Route Builder. I'll show you why in a little bit. But basically, over here in our health checks endpoints, I need a function that will kind of map our endpoints for this section. And I could have this take, this is kind of what I was getting to here, I could have this take a web application. And I could literally just paste our apt-get in here. This will work perfectly fine. But what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to take an iEndpoint Route Builder instead. This will work identical because as you saw, it's inherited. And this endpoint Route Builder is what I need. The reason I'm doing that is because I'm going to add a second project. Actually, I might as well just do that right now so I don't have to keep saying I'm going to. Where our presentation layer is, I have this web API project that works great for the API. What I run into a lot is I need to make changes to scripts, to database, to customer fields, all kinds of different things. I don't want to keep republishing web API over and over and over and over again to add a new script, to add a database migration, to add a change here, to add some stuff there. I can do fixes to the database by just running SQL, but sometimes it's nice just to kind of have a coded function that I can hit, kind of hidden behind the scenes. So what I'm always going to make in presentation, I'm going to make another project, and this will be another web API. So I'm going to click on web, I'm going to click on web API, and I'm going to call this one web admin. This is not generally available to anybody that's not a dev, anybody that's not, me or my team, etc. This is just something that I can now make modifications to this, which could run, database migrations, it could run fix-it scripts, it could run anything. And I can run these without needing to take down API even for a split second. I can just keep, running admin over and over and over again. Everything else stays the same. So I just did web admin, net9, C# web API, no auth, all the usual stuff. We're just going to hit create here. And that's about it for that. I'm not going to do anything else with that right now. I just want it there so you guys you can understand why I'm going to be using this. This Endpoint route builder, if I start adding different types of these presentation layers, they won't all necessarily be web application. Specifically, if you start getting to some Blazor level apps, if you start getting into those scenarios, I don't think they're all web applications. Some of them are just like application or mobile application. I don't even remember what the names are, but I found that it's a little bit safer for me to use the interface instead of web application. If you want to use web application, go for it. It'll be perfectly fine. This will come up again a little bit later, today yet, I would assume. So I'll probably slam on it again today. I know I'm spending a lot of time on it. It's one of those things that'll save you trouble down the line to just use this Endpoint route builder. Let's continue with this. In map endpoints, I don't want to just map an endpoint. What I want to do is I want to make a whole group. So I'm going to make a group of endpoints, and I'm going to do map group. And I'm going to call this API v1 health check group. So now what happens, I can't remember if I need this slash here or not. I'll find out shortly. I'm going to take this group, and instead of doing an app.mapget, I'm going to do a group.mapget. I think I should really return this endpoint route builder. Let's return app. So now what I can do, I can kind of group several of these, but every one of them is going to be prefixed with API/v1/health check. So for this very first get, which I want to just be /health check, I can actually just kind of take this down to nothing, which means this will be a get on API/v1/health check. Just to show you how we're going to kind of continue this, if I make a second, I can do fail. And if I assume we're going to respond with a failure here on this one, like a bad request, let's say, this would be API/v1/health check/fail. And let's go ahead and implement this, and then we'll test it quick. So I need to fire this map endpoints in order to toggle this, right, to get these here. So I'm going to go back to my program, delete that stuff I was doing, and delete this original one. What I need to do is, of course, I need to create that class. I think I called it endpoints. And then I can just do endpoints, map endpoints, passing in the app. You see that works perfectly fine, no red errors, everybody's happy. Let's go ahead and run this. That's up, this is here. So I still have the health check one, let's go ahead and just run that. I get a not found now, and that's because, if you remember, this is no longer /health check, this is now API/v1/health check. So let's save this, run. Now you see I get a 200 success. I'm going to duplicate this because we want to check that fail handler, or the fail endpoint. It's health checks slash fail. Save, run this one. You see, I do get the string fail now and a 400 bad request. Let me see if I can show kind of both of these on the screen at the same time. Yeah, kind of. So you can see here, you know, the bad request is 400, and I'm getting the fail string here, fail. And then we're just using Postman to test all this. So we know everything's working, which is all we really needed to do here. Let's go ahead and stop this run. Now, this didn't solve my problem a whole lot. I can actually do less of this now. If I keep it this way, what I'd have to do is I'd have to do a map endpoints for every group. Now that may not be 500. I may have cut that into like a fifth of that. It may be 100 now instead of 500. But that's still too many. I'd like to get this down to 1. We're going to do that a little bit later. But just know that this is a temporary thing right now for testing and just showing and what we're going to grow into and why we're doing it this way. Let's carry on. Now, these endpoints are just returning strings. They're not doing anything. So I'd like to add a little bit of I don't know, some meat to them so that they actually do something. So what I'm going to do, because we're going to need it everywhere, is I'm going to set up logging, and we'll just kind of log a success, log an error, and then we'll return. So let's do that pretty quickly. In our program.cs, let me minimize this again for you. In our program.cs, you can see that this is fairly basic. Logging is on by default, and it logs to console. I think if you debug, you see these little logs down here. This is all what's already getting logged. This stuff already shows up. This is an info log. There might be some warnings. I don't see any yet, but this is all getting logged, and it all works perfectly fine. I want to change this to something a little more powerful than just the basic console logging. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to set up Serilog. Serilog is one of, I don't know, 50 loggers. There's tons of these things. They all do things a little bit differently. Serilog, I don't know if it's the best one. It's just the one that I've been using the most lately, and I do like it. It runs really well. It does a whole bunch of stuff that I couldn't possibly think of. So I'm going to get it set up, and it's fairly simple. Quickest way to get this moving is to just add the NuGet package. You would expect that I'm going to add the NuGet package to Web API, but I'm not going to. And it's another one of those scenarios because I have the 2 presentation layers. Because I want logging on both the API and admin, I want both of them to have Serilog. I need both of them to have access to Serilog files. I don't need anything down the pipe to have access to it because everything below is going to be using iLogger. But I do need both Web API and Web Admin to have access to it. So I could make a third project and be like some shared presentation class library that would implement this, but I'm not going to do that because I just don't think that there's as much gain. There's not enough gain in it for me. I'm just going to put them on application, which is the one tier down. API and admin both have access to application. So I'm just going to put the stuff that I want on application. On application, I will manage NuGet packages, and I will look for Serilog. It's like SERI log. I'm going to get rid of pre-release so we don't run into that stuff. And we're looking for ASP.NET Core. There's 2 ways in this kind of a project to set this up. There's probably more than 2 ways, let's be honest here, but the 2 ways that I know of, we can use ASP.NET Core, and that's all we'd need. Or I can use extensions hosting, and then I can a la carte everything else that I need. Serilog runs on a what do they call them? Their outputs are syncs. So if you see .syncs, you can see they can log out to a file, out to a console, debug, seek. You can log to SQL Server, Splunk. I think Loggly's down here somewhere. You can just log out to email. There's tons of these things. I think there's a Slack hookup I know that I've used somewhere down here. I know there's a Slack sync. Yeah, there's tons of these, okay? Every logger has this concept of kind of outputs, right? Some call them buckets or caches or queues, or some just call them outputs, right? Serilog calls them sinks. So when I'm looking at Serilog and I see extensions hosting, I can grab extensions hosting and then whichever sinks that I want. ASP.NET Core is extensions hosting and file and console. There may be some other stuff going on in there too, but that's what I'm pretty sure is going on there. Those two kind of line up to look like they're doing the same thing. So I'm going to grab ASP.NET Core. Since it has everything I need, we're going to log to file right away. Not because I think it's the best, smartest way to do it, but because I think it's an easy way to kind of get started doing something a little more advanced. And I don't want to pay for databases and all that kind of stuff right now for logging all that stuff and cloud logging infrastructure. That installed on application. So we can go back to our web API. We're going to go to our program. Somewhere in here, we're going to add Serilog. Now, since I don't remember how the heck to install Serilog, we're going to go to Serilog, ASP.NET Core, GitHub. And let's take a look. Let's read the docs. So, is this like a first paragraph or two? Instructions. And this is a program.cs file, which is exactly what I'm looking for. And you can see right here, where it says add this line, this is literally the only line that I need to use. But looking at this, I really like the way that they're setting up the application in a try catch and this log close and flush. I'm assuming it's fairly important to make sure that all your logs get written before you leave. So I'm actually going to take pretty much this whole try catch. Actually, let me take this first log as well. And I will set that up in here. Of course, do my import. And I'm going to grab this catch and finally throw that down here. I'm going to, what's it called, clean this up so that it's not all like goofy tabbed. That's in ReSharper or Rider. This is Control EF. It'll bring up this dialog the first time. I'm going to tell it to do a full cleanup, set up and run. Now anytime I do an EF, it'll start tabbing everything over and clean up code. I won't be able to note that every time because it's such a habit. I don't even know what I'm doing at half the time. But as you can see now, I basically took their thing with the catch and the finally and the try catch up at the top. It all works great. I still need to add that builder.services though. So in here, where this builder.services.add Serilog, this I still need to add. I could do that right here, and this will work, but I want to start separating out some of my startup, my service dependencies. I don't want this program.cs file to get like a mile long. So in web API, I'm going to add another file. I'm going to call it dependency injection. Dependency injection. And I'm going to make a static void add web API, which takes an iService collection of services. And in here, I'm going to set up my services. So really what I would want is something like add logging here. Ask services, and then I would do like a private static service collection. And here I would do services.add Serilog. This would need to be static in order to use my this. I like this setup better because now all of my dependency injection is in its own kind of file. And we'll expand on this shortly. Let me finish setting up this Serilog though so I don't jump all over the place. So now I have this add web API, which is actually going to be calling that add Serilog. If I go back to my program, I don't need to call this anymore. What I need to call instead is I really need to call builder.services.add web API, which will then fire off, oops, I only meant to delete the one. This will fire off any services that I have registered in there. So now instead of 30, 40, 50 lines of setup here, I'm going to do it all in that one file. I'm just moving this up a little bit, kind of cleaning this. So this concept is going to be duplicated throughout. So I'm going to go ahead and set that up right now. Yeah, I'll just set it up right now. As of right now, we have this logger right into console. We'll get some log stuff here, and it's all going to work actually pretty well. Let me test this, and then I'll set up these quick. Just so you remember, because they're about to change. These were the old logs, okay? I pull up the old one. So this is info, hosting lifetime now listing on whatever. There's a few different things for development and route paths and whatever. It doesn't really matter. Just this is what they look like. It's across 2 lines, little black and white, or black and green, I guess that is, with white text. Let's go ahead and just run this with just the builder.add, builder.services.add Serilog, just to show you that this is working, or hopefully working, right? You can see already we're getting these one-line things now. The messages are still the same, of course, but we're getting these one-line logs now. So I know that this is using Serilog. So we set everything up correctly, which is brilliant. They're still only going to console, but we'll switch that shortly here. Let's go ahead and stop. So this dependency injection thing, I'm actually going to take this file and duplicate it in most of the other projects. So on persistence, I'm going to add a dependency injection. I'm not going to need the logging anywhere else. And I'm going to rename this, so instead of add web API, it'll be add whatever the project name is. So in this one, it's add persistence, of course. In infrastructure, I will add a dependency injection as well. Of course, we'll call it add infrastructure. I'm going to skip over domain and contract for now. I may need it in domain later, but I'm certain I won't need it in contract. Application will for sure, though, need dependency injection. Dependency injection is really just where we're going to be setting up all of our services, register our services, register interfaces. It's kind of a bucket of services we can use all over the place. Okay, so I got add application, add infrastructure, add persistence. If I go back to my program.cs, where I have my web API, I'm going to clone this a few times and then add each of those, each of the ones we just added. Add infrastructure and add persistence. At this point, the order doesn't matter. I don't think it will when we get to the end of this, but at some point, depending on exactly what services you're set up, the order of these may become something you'll need to monitor. I'm kind of setting from the ground up. So this starts closer to the bottom and works its way up to the top. But depending on your situation, you may need to kind of keep an eye on that. These 2 calls here to infrastructure and persistence are the only reason that I needed the reference to persistence and infrastructure on our last episode. These are the only time that I should be ever calling infrastructure or persistence layers directly. And it's because here's where I'm registering their dependency injection. It's where I'm registering their scoped services and I guess all their services. So this is the only time. This is the only reason we needed that. If it wasn't for that, we wouldn't even need to reference those. So this is all set up. Let's get back to our logging. Console logging. The Serilog is logging to console, which is this, but that really won't help us when we're on production or staging or any kind of server environment, right? There is no console for us to go and see. So we do want to add file logging. In order to do file logging, what we're going to do, let me copy this and go into our add web API where we're setting this up. What we want to do is we'll want to kind of modify this. It's really going to be more of like a write to file and then whatever a file path is. Okay. And it'll look something like this. But I don't remember that. So let's go find it. Back to their website again. Usually, so this is the example of the logs we just saw that. Usually there's a file example. We're going to use this later as well. I'm looking for a write to file. Here. So write to file. Well, let's just copy this. And what I'll do is just plop that in here. And of course that goes off the screen. So let's drop this. So by default, it looks like this. It's not a bad way to do it. It's actually a fairly smooth way to do it. I'm going to change just a few things here. So what this looks like is that we're going to write to console and to file. That's fine, but after this, what I'm going to want to do is I only want to write to console if I'm in development. If I'm in production or staging, I don't want to write to console anymore. So I want to add some if-else kind of logic. In that sense, I'll need to know which environment I'm in. But for right now, let's get the file thing set up. So when I'm writing a file, they're doing this path.combine environment.get environment variable. I don't want to get an environment variable. I want to switch this to get folder path, I believe. Whichever one takes the special folder. And there's a boatload of special folders. Here's a bunch of them. I'm not going to read through them all, but you can Google them and look them up, whichever one you want. The idea of the special folder is that the folder has an equivalent in Windows, Mac, and Linux. So if you're looking for example, I'm going to be using common application data here for this. In Windows, this is C program data. In Linux or Mac, it's something else. I don't know what it is in them, but you could go Google it and find it. But there's an equivalent, or near equivalent to each one of these. If you're looking for system, on Windows it's this, on Linux it's this, on Mac it's this. You don't need to memorize them all. You can just tell it which folder you're looking for, and it'll go grab it based on the environment that it's on. So this would be the equivalent. If you saw the was that dark gray? It's because I don't need this in here, and because I need space, running out of real estate. Cleared that out. So this right now looks like the equivalent. This is actually going to be so C program data / log files / application / diagnostics.txt. I'm going to change this to logs. I'm going to change this to Riome. And for right now, I'm just going to say web API. So this will be C program data / Riome / web API / logs txt. Rolling interval is when new log files should get created. Daily is great. There's hourly options. There's probably weekly. I don't know what kind of options they all are. But if I hover over this, you can see that year, month, day is going to be appended to every file name. So what's going to happen is even though I want to call this logs, it's actually going to be logs year, month, day. When we pull this up. So days are perfect for me. I'm more than happy to roll on days. I think if you wanted, I'm pretty sure it's just, I guess, infinite. Year, minute, month, hours. We're going to roll on day. File size limit in bytes. So this is 1024 bytes is a kilobyte. 1024 kilobytes is a megabyte. 10 megabytes is 10 megabytes. So this must be 10 megabytes-ish. Retained file count. This seems valid for file. Retained file count, I'm going to bump way up. I'm going to do more like 50. What I'd really like to do is say something like retained, I guess, days. I wonder if there is a retained, nope. What I'd really love is some kind of like, I don't care how many files this is or how much space they take up. I want 30 days of logs or 60 days of logs. This roll on file size limit true means that if my file size hits 10 meg, it's going to make another file, and then another file, and then another file. If I have some mega day where it makes 50 files, and I'm retaining only 50 files, I only have that one day of logs. What happens if I need from a week ago? I've had times, especially when it's dealing with money and stuff like that, where people are asking me for stuff from 3 months ago. 90 days ago, I ran this payment and I can't find it, you know. So I'd really like to have a little bit more of that option, but this is going to be fine. Later on, if we start dumping into databases, which is usually where I'll get to, then I can just count on the database to do deletions as I see fit. So in the meantime, though, this will work out perfect. I've never used shared before. It was part of that thing, but this, as you can see, and allow the log file to be shared by multiple processes. The default is false. I don't care if it's sharing or not. This is the only process that's going to be using it, but I'm going to leave it to true. Flush to disk interval is at 1 second. I'm going to bump this up to 5. If you really have high throughput and you really need every single second of log just in case something happens, you're going to want this as low as you can possibly make it without tanking your system. I don't care if I lose the last 5 seconds of logs. Flush to disk is, when is it right? If it's got a log in there, it can wait up to what I'm setting here is 5 seconds before it'll write it. The idea being it's trying to queue up more of them so it can batch send them as opposed to send one at a time. I don't care about losing the last 5 seconds of logs. That may sound a little crazy, but in doing this for as long as I have, I've never run into an instance where the last 5 or 10 seconds of logs were the make or break on whether I could fix a problem or not. So I would rather protect my hard drive a little bit more and make sure that I'm not needing to write quite as often. So that's why we're going this route. So this should work. We're going to log to console and we're going to log to file. It's going to be all happy. Let's go ahead and run this and find out. Let's first open my program data and let me find. So I got Razor and Reg ID right now. I don't have a Riome folder yet, which is expected. Let's go ahead and run this. So I'm starting the project here again. Looks like it's starting. I'm starting to get logs and everything started up properly. So if I go back into here now, you can see that I do have Riome now. And in here there's a web API and there's logs year, month, day. If I open it up, I get a mountain of garbage, but here's my logs. Cool. They're all showing up. Of course, you can't see that because this is too big. Let me make it small enough to fit in that zoom there. Logs are showing up, which is cool. Yay. So now we're logging a file. So we're logging to console and we're logging to file. But like I said, I don't necessarily want to log to console if I'm on production. So let me get around to modifying that a little bit. In our program.cs, our builder actually has an environment variable which has these is development, is production, is staging on them already. So we can use those to tell ourselves what environment that we're on. So I just need to kind of lock those down and store them somewhere so I know what I'm running on. In domain, I'm going to do that. I consider this like a static model that I can use all over the place, but that will never be exposed to anyone outside of the project. So I just want this on domain. I want as many people as possible to see this within the project. I just don't want it exposed anywhere. In domain, I'm going to make a new folder. I'm going to call it common. And I'm going to add a new file here. We'll call it domain options. I'm going to put a environment variable on here, which I don't have yet. So I have to create this variable. I'm going to create an enum. So in common again, because this won't go anywhere else, I'm going to make a directory called enums, and let's make an environment enum. Normally I would call this environment, but I'm not going to because there's already, I think, 2 or 3 different things called environment just baked into C#. So I'm going to call this RI environment for Riome. I'll usually 2-letter. For anything that I know that is a pretty common keyword, that people use a lot, you'll see me put an RI in front of it. So if you see me doing it again and I fail to explain it, that's all it is. I'm just doing Riome environment. and this will be an enum. My enums will be development, staging, and production. The numbers don't matter. They're worthless. You can make them whatever the heck you want or not even put it in there. This is just, an enum is a number. It bothers me if I don't put them in there. You can actually get rid of them. You don't need them. And honestly, for this environment variable, they won't do anything for us to have the numbers. But it's like an OCD problem almost, I suppose. I need to kind of have them there. The number of times where I've had to, if no numbers are here by default, I guess here's why. Look, this doesn't matter for this specific one, but let me show you how this happens. Okay, so these environment, this enum right now, development is 0, staging is 1, production is 2. Let's say you started saving this to the database, or you started saving as JSON files, or you started saving these out anywhere in files or whatever. You put the RI environment on the database record, right? So it has a 0 or 1 or a 2 in there. Later on, 6 months down the line, someone comes in and they add local as a new one. Now, local is 0, development is 1, staging is 2, production is 3. You just screwed up everything in your database. Alternatively, if you would have done this right away and just had them numbered, even if someone comes in here and does this, and he puts like a 3 or a 4, you're fine. This won't hurt anything. This looks really stupid, and hopefully that dev would kind of be smart enough to put it down here. But if they did still put it up at the top, it wouldn't matter because now you forcibly set the numbers. So you can be a little safer with that stuff. So out of, I don't know, safety or something, I'm giving them numbers, but that was a silly tangent, but now you know why. They don't matter for this, just that's what I'm doing. Back to the domain options, like I said, here I want to store an environment, so I'm going to store a RI environment called environment. I'm going to make a getter for it and a private setter because I don't want this ever to be changed once we've set the thing up. I want this class static. I want every variable to be static. And now I need a way to set this. Because this is a private setter, I can't set environment directly. What I'm going to make is an init function. And the reason I have this private is because I don't want somebody to, let's say the project is running and there's some additional method later on somewhere else. I don't ever want anything else to be able to even remotely have the chance to change environment. If they did environment equals staging when they're supposed to be in development, and then it could screw up all kinds of things. So I want to lock that down. So I'm making this a private setter. You'll see a lot of private setters as we go along here. I'm going to create a init function, init domain options, where I pass the environment. And in here, what I can do is I can set it. Now, this is public, which means later on, someone could call domain options.init domain options again and reset environment to something else. They could still screw it up. But at least with my teams that I've worked with so far, where I have had times where environment would just get set, not specifically environment, but other variables on this same kind of a pattern, they will get changed at a later time. It's usually because they're trying to do testing or, hey, it's breaking in production or something, so they try to fake the environment variable over to production or something, and then forget to set it back before like a publish. What I've had in my line is that as long as I do just a separate function, it's dangerous enough for them where they know that they really shouldn't be calling this function over and over again. If for some reason you have some kind of a jerk dev, what you can do is you can put just like a bool here of like an is initialized, and then do something like if it is initialized return, and then of course is initialized equals true. You could do something like this. So we're going to call init domain options right at project startup in program.cs. Later on, if somebody tries to call init again, it's just going to return because, is initialized gets set to true, and you can never call it again. It's a little bit safer. I'm not going to keep this in here because I'm not worried about it as the only dev. But just so you know, this is a very important variable that really should never be fiddled with. So let's go set it up. We're going to go onto our web API and program. And as you remember, I've got that builder environment thing. We're going to use that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to set up our default environment to be development. And then I'm going to say if the builder environment is production, then our environment becomes production. Else, if the builder environment is staging, then our environment becomes staging. So then, as soon as we possibly can, domain options.init domain options, passing our environment. There. So now, everything after this, which of course is all of our service registration, now knows what environment we're on. And we can use that for our logging. So let's go to our logging. Because what we can do in here now is I can do config and config so hopefully this I know I didn't talk my way through that one as much as I normally do here, but basically I just kind of broke that out a little bit, okay? So now I'm taking the config and kind of doing each thing separately as opposed to fluently. Because what I can do now is I can basically say if domain options environment is development, write to console. Cool. So if we're in development, we're going to write to console and file. If we're not in development, we're only writing to file. Super simple, right? And then we set the logger, and then we add Serilog. Because I've used Serilog a while, I'm going to go back out to the program CS and take a look at this original one where we're writing a console. I could delete this. If I do, we won't have any logging up until add web API. If anything happens in here, we wouldn't have any kind of logging to files or anywhere else. So I do want to keep it, but I am going to change this. Instead of create logger, I'm going to create it as a bootstrap logger. I don't know how it works or what it all does. I just know that bootstrap logger in Serilog is a way to tell it that this is like not permanent. It's like a temporary logger. What does it say here? Creates a reloadable logger for use during host bootstrapping. Yeah, I mean, that's a huge thing. I can't read all that. I mean, I can. Configuration overload will detect when logger is set to reloadable logger instance and reconfigure or freeze it so that iLoggers created during host bootstrapping continue to work once logger configuration with access to host services is completed. It's something about setting this up as a temporary logger as opposed to the logger that we're using. So I'm going to leave this as a bootstrap logger. I have my environment, got web API. Let's go ahead and run this. Just after all that's changed, I want to make sure that everything's still functioning. So we should get somewhere, we'll get logging still, I would hope. Yep, so we still have Siri logging here. If we check our files, let's make this bigger. C, program data, Riome. I've got some new ones, 332, 1532, yep. So I'm still logging, which is good. Everything is still working. That's all great. While I'm here, while I'm on this init domain options, because I'm going to be using this as well, I do want to pass the presentation layer. API. This is another one of those things. I'm doing this because I have the two presentation layers. I want to know which presentation layer I'm on sometimes when I'm setting up the domain options. So if I go into domain options, I'm going to take in a string and presentation source, we'll call it. It's a little bit long, but I don't like calling it project source. I'm not sure the right thing to call it, but I think I'll be able to remember this presentation source. Because now what I can do in my web API, where I'm setting up Serilog, we can make this a bit more dynamic. So I know I want to write to Riome, and I want to write to domain options dot presentation source now as the second folder. So I'll get a folder for each of the two presentation layers. So I'll get a web admin folder or a web API folder. And in order to do that, since I'm going to be logging the same way on both admin and API, now that I have this all set up, I want to move this to somewhere that I can use it from both locations. So that web API I can call it web admin and web API I can call it. So let me copy this. And again, I'm going to go back to application. Okay. So if I go to application and I create a common folder, and I do another directory for startup, I think I'm going to call this logging options. I don't know if that's the right thing I should call this. Logging startup maybe, or logging configuration or something. We'll make it a static, and I will make a static logger configuration. Yep. We'll call it configuration, and we will just do like a get. And paste in the stuff that I had from before. Add my references. Of course, at the bottom I need to return the config. So now logging options.configuration is going to create a config which will write to console if we're on development, or and always write to file. And the folders will of course be based on the presentation source. Everything else exactly the same though, but if I wanted to, I could theoretically flag this presentation source and make changes here depending on how I want to write. If on admin I don't want to store 50 files, I only want to store 10, we could do that obviously with a simple if else. We don't need to though. So let's switch our web API to use this now instead. Go to our web API. Our config now is no longer all of this stuff. It's now actually, what did I call it? Logging options? Yep, logging options.configuration, pretty sure. Implement reference, or import reference. Beautiful. There. So now I have add logging going on, and it's pulling configuration from application, and now I could quite literally copy paste this into web admin and it would still work exactly as the way that I would want it to. We're not going to go down that route today, but just know that it's here. So what do I got? I have our one endpoint, and we've got our health checks, and of course we used Postman to test them, which is great. So I think we're looking pretty good today. I think I'm going to stop here. I want to get into handlers and actually implementing some of that logging. I can't implement it here very well. Let's go ahead and do it anyways. Just we shouldn't really ever be doing this, but just for the sake of testing things out here. If I do an iLogger, I don't have a thing here. This is the problem. And I do like a logger, log information, success. I do like something similar down here. A logger. Let's do like a log warning here instead, just to see a different color. If I run these now, this will be kind of the final test for today. It lets us know our logging is working and our endpoints are still working after all those changes that we made. So get information, but I haven't run these yet. So let's pull this up. I'm going to keep this small just so you can kind of see the thing down here. But when I run the regular health check, you'll see I do get success up here, and down here I get health check success info. If I run the fail, you'll see I get a warn health check down here. On top of course, HTTPS stuff and what's all happening. 400 response on that. So logging is working. We're logging a Serilog. We're logging a file. We have an endpoint. I want to get into handlers next, but let's save that for the next round. I think we've done enough for today. Thanks for watching. Get ready for handlers coming up here shortly. We've got a good ways to go yet, but I think we're making really good progress. So hope to see you next time. Thanks.